work the graveyard shift at a prison, you see some messed up stuff. And I'm not talking about the kind of stuff that you're thinking of right now. Inmates going after their bunkmates, screaming all through the night. None of that is unusual. That's the basic stuff. The kind of stuff that makes you get mad and shout. I'm talking about the kind of stuff that makes you go quiet. The stuff that when you see it or hear it, you go pale and your eyes go wide. Something happened recently that slots straight into this category. It's hard to even put it into words, honestly. To explain it to you, I've got to go to the very start of the story. I was doing my rounds on an otherwise normal night. One of the inmates named Phil had been shouting for a while, as he usually did, so me and my night watch partner Armin had to go in and beat him quiet. Phil had made a habit of shouting all day and all night about how he was innocent, and it was so annoying. Beating inmates was business as usual for us because there was no other way to reel them in when they got rowdy. You might think it harsh, but it's just the way that we do things. Anyway, apart from Phil being, Phil, it was a normal night. Until we got to Lee's cell. Didn't think much of it at first. Lee was a lifer in for killing 6 rival gang members in a shootout. He was sitting on the ground at the far end of his cell, with his back against the wall and his knees up against his chest. It wasn't unusual for inmates to stay up late, doing not much of anything, so my partner and I walked down by. It wasn't worth our time to force inmates to go to bed, least of all a stone-cold guy like Lee. After our patrol, we typically kicked back in the control room, watching the cameras for a couple of hours. Actually, to tell you the truth, neither of us really bothered to do what we were supposed to be doing in there. I mean, hell, there were like 20 of these cameras and there was never anything worth looking at on them. Just a series of long hallways, dimly lit and all grainy. I'm sitting in the control room right now as I type this and looking up. There's not a worthwhile thing to be seen. Anyway, after a couple of hours, we headed out on our second patrol. And when we got to Lee's cell, he was sitting the exact same, staring the exact same. "Lee," I called to him, "get to bed already." He didn't answer or move or anything. Even in the dark, the whites of his eyes were bright. And when I swung my flashlight on him, the glow shimmered off his arms and his forehead like he was sweating buckets. I looked up at his bunkmate. He was fast asleep, snoring soundly. I looked back at Lee. "Lee, I'm not gonna tell you again. Get to bed." "Lee, answer me." Nothing. He was frozen like a statue, only this statue was shaking a little. And those eyes, gosh dang, they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. "A freak," my partner muttered. "Come on, ain't worth it." I nodded and went along, leaving Lee to his shenanigans, but it didn't sit right with me. The way that he was just sitting there and staring, I felt like he was staring right through me. As my partner and I got back into the control room, the lights and screens flickered a little. I didn't think anything of it. Our slammer was one of the older ones. We got back to scrolling our phones till the end of our shift. About Lee, you're probably thinking that he was just a loony like the rest of the inmates, and that loonies do crazy stuff all the time, right? You'd be right, usually. Basic stuff. But get this. That morning, right when I had gotten home after my shift, I got a call from work. First time they had ever called me at that hour. And then another first time thing. The prison warden himself was on the line. "What the heck happened with Lee?" he said to me. He was acting a little odd," I told him. "But that's all, sir. Lee is dead. Dawn Patrol found him with his throat torn out." My first thought was that his bunkmate did it to him. I mean, basic stuff, right? But apparently, his bunkmate woke up when Dawn Patrol went in there to investigate, and the bunkmate was so scared by what he saw that he literally pissed himself. and Dawn Patrol swore that it couldn't have been an act. Well, they pinned the murder on him anyway. The bunkmate got life on top of life. Basic stuff that. We don't do the whole court case thing in our prison. You know, where cops look everything over and witnesses take the stand and ultimately smart people decide who's guilty and who's not. Nah, usually we just pick whoever looks most suspect in a given situation, and the judge just slaps another life sentence on them, doubling or tripling the life sentence they first came in for. The next night I went by Lee's cell again on my patrol. They had cleaned the place up and his bunkmate was still in there. Kinda messed up honestly that they didn't even move him, but that's basic stuff. Things got even weirder then. Lee's bunkmate, his name was Walter, was awake and crying in the cell. I figured he was crying because of the new life sentence, which meant that he no longer had any chance of parole, seeing as he had killed his wife and mailed parts of her to her family out of spite. But that wasn't it. He stood up when I got to his cell and grabbed the bars so fast that I leapt back, hand on my baton. "You gotta do me in," he barked. What? I stuttered. "Make it quick. Do me in, I'm begging." Armin, my partner, chuckled. "What's your deal, Walt?" "It's coming." Walter spat that out, literally. I had to wipe my face with the back of my hand. "It?" Armin drawled. "Got Lee. I'm next. Do me in, please. Quick and painless, please." Armin and I looked at each other. He was smirking, I was frowning. "Walt, nobody's coming after you," I told him. "Except maybe us." Walter began to cry again as he pressed his cheeks against the cold bars. "Please," he begged. "Oh, come on," Armin rumbled. I followed as he continued on down the hallway. Walter started moaning. "No, no, no." He thumped his head lightly against the bars as we walked off, rattling them. Armin scoffed, shaking his head. I looked at him. Any idea what that was about? I heard inmates whispering about it now and again. It's like a folktale for lifers. A folktale? A fairy tale, a spooky story, whatever you want to call it. And don't let it bother ya. I shrugged. I didn't know inmates had folktales. Thought they were too stupid to come up with anything like that. You're probably right. A visitor must have tried to spook one of them one time and it happened to take hold. We didn't talk for the rest of our rounds, and luckily, Phil was actually quiet that night. All in all, it was an easy patrol. We got back to control, grabbed a coffee each, and kicked back. As usual, neither of us bothered looking at the displays. The control room was a glorified break room, and it almost made the other crap that we had to do within that job worth it. I was lost in some Twitter thread when the lights went out. And there was a loud zap and snap and they were off. The displays were on but crackling. Even my phone was flickering. "Come on," Armin shouted. By the look of his face against the glow of the screens, he wasn't mad. He was rattled. I had never seen Armin rattled before. "What's going on?" I asked. "Power outage." He was staring at the cams, eyes bouncing from one screen to the next. The lights were out in the halls too. The cameras were lit in a greenish hue as their night vision kicked in. Nah, no way. The cells are power locked. We have like 5 backup generators for that exact reason, and I don't see anyone busting out. Besides, the screens are still upright, so the lights are just whacked out. "Holy crap, Armin," I whispered. "What about the regular locks? The ones we have keys for?" "Oh, they're old as hell," Armin said. "Everybody knows it, including the inmates. Could kick through those things easily. It's the auto locks that keep them shut." One of the cams caught my eye. "Armin, look there." What the hell? We both stared in silence at the cam at the end of Walter's hallway. It caught his cell at an angle enough so that we could see him still standing there where we had left him. He was slamming his head against the bars. Not lightly like earlier. He was throwing his whole weight at them. I looked at Armin. We should. Oh God. I nearly fell off my chair at Armin shouting. I looked back at the cam. Walter's cell door had opened. Oh shit, the power was out, and he was stumbling over the space in front of his nook. We gotta lock the door to control. We got a radio for backup. I snatched the radio from the table beneath the cams, clicked the button, and... nothing. The radio was out. I tried my phone, but it was still whacked out. Look, Armin gasped. Walter was still outside his cell. He had grabbed the bars from the outside this time and was going at it again, ramming his head against them. There was black spreading across the bars and the floor at his feet. Blood, probably. And somehow that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was that the other inmates hadn't tried to break out. They hadn't even walked up to their bars, not one of them. These dudes would squeeze their faces against the bars anytime anything the least bit interesting happened. Yet now they were all tucked away. Armin and I were frozen, as though something bad would happen if one of us got up. I could have sworn that the air was colder than usual in control. For a moment, I even thought that I saw my own breath visible in front of me. I felt like I was in a bad dream. It all felt surreal and went against everything that I had experienced in that prison. Just then, I thought I saw something. At the end of the hall down from Walter's cell, it was like the light reaching the cam from that place was scratchy. For an instant, and I can't be sure because the night vision was blurry as hell, it looked as though Walter turned his head to the side, looking down the hall toward that distorted place. I opened my mouth to mention it to Armin, but then Walter wound up and threw himself at the bars hard. And didn't need HD to see that his neck snapped. He collapsed, his head dangling around his torso like a melon in a sack. I yelped, then I screamed because the lights came back on with a loud zap and snap. Radio should be back up. Let's call it in, Armin muttered. Call what in? He stammered. Power outage, broken out prisoner, and, prisoner death. Psychotic break. I did as Armin asked. The radio was back up, everything was back to normal, and for what it was worth, nobody else had broken out. The doors were probably back up. We locked up in the control room as we waited for backup. No way that we were going to chance it out on the block until it was a sure thing that the cells were secure. We didn't speak much while we waited. A schizo, was all Armin said, mostly to himself. Not a label I like to use personally, but it was true that the inmates were often sick in the head. Walter had clearly been sick in the head. Finally, backup arrived. It took all of 5 minutes for the contracted mercs to confirm that these cells were secure. Apart from the mess that Walter had made, everything was in order. And dawn was coming round, and it was nearly time for me to head home when one of the inmates called me over. It was Mike, the lifer who had a thing for kids. I didn't want to talk to him honestly. I mean, he really liked young kids, but he insisted, and with the weirdness of that day, I figured that I would hear him out. I walked up, crossed my arms. What do you want? I didn't look at him. He was frazzled, more than what's usual for guys like him. You gotta talk to the warden. Shit, talk to the governor if you gotta. Tell them the prison ain't safe anymore, that the doors ain't working. Whatever you gotta tell him. Just get us transferred. I nearly laughed. Transferred? This isn't the kind of spot where you get to request transfers, Mike. Not just us inmates. Yourself too, believe me. We need to get out of here. And why is that? His mouth snapped shut. I glanced at him and saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, and that's saying something, because you see all kinds of weird stuff in eyes like Mike's. He opened his mouth and spoke slowly. Our turn's come. Bad luck. It won't leave until it's had its fill. "What are you on about?" I asked. I didn't want to give Mike, of all people, the benefit of the doubt, yet my voice was a little uneven. He swallowed and then whispered, "Stalker." I rolled my eyes. Without another word, I stepped away and made toward the exit, eager to be done for the day. "Listen to me," Mike begged. "It's for your good as much as mine." He kept going, getting louder as I got farther away. He shouted, giving his bars a kick that drew the attention of one of the morning guys. He got hushed up real quick as I left the block. As I drove home after that shift, I felt stupid because I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said. Walter had mentioned something similar as well before his incident. It was something Armin had heard of too, apparently. I resolved to ask my partner about it the next shift. He would laugh at me, but better than talking about it with that thing called Mike. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and when I finally did fall asleep, I had a nightmare. You would think this nightmare would be about throats torn out and heads smashed against the bars, right? But no, the nightmare was me in the hallway. It was an empty hallway of stone walls and cement flooring, dimly lit by those cold lights that we have at work. But it wasn't really empty. At the far end of the hallway, the space there was wrong. The air was wrong. Hell, I can't explain it. I told you at the start of the story, didn't I? It's hard to put into words. Just trying to type this is giving me chills and making me feel all cold. Anyway, I got to my next shift, said hey to Armin, and we got going on our rounds. You might think it unusual that we could just carry on at the prison despite the recent happenings. Thing is, from the point of view of the higher-ups, these incidents weren't that big of a deal. Death is business as usual in a prison like ours. You had to be there during these events to really grasp that what was happening was particularly messed up. During patrol, Armin acted as cool as ever. I couldn't tell you whether that was a front or not. I hoped it wasn't because of what I was about to say. "Have you heard of a thing called the Stalker?" I asked him. He looked at me sidelong for a split second. Man, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. What was that supposed to mean? I kept quiet as we rounded a corner, dropping into Walter and Lee's hallway. "I don't listen to that trash," Armin said. "These guys are crazy. Don't take them seriously." "I'm not taking them seriously. I'm just curious, dude." Armin sighed. "All right then, I'll tell you. Relax." We walked past the cell that Lee and Walter had lived in for years. It was empty now, as you would expect, at least until they had fixed up the door. They had cleaned the place up, but you could still see faint brown stains along the bars and the floor. Armin continued. "Like I said the other day, it's a kind of myth for these guys. They think the stalker is something that comes after people like them." I frowned. People like them. And people who have done terrible things. Huh, I shrugged. Fair, more power to the stalker. Armin grinned at me. "That's what I'm saying. It makes our job easier, right?" I chuckled, though I didn't really find it all that funny. We carried on in silence, our footsteps echoing off the walls and ringing across the block. The inmates were quieter than usual, and when we would walk past their cells, they would eye us warily. Even Phil was chill. That was the second shift in a row that he had been. His best streak yet in the 2 years that I had worked on that block. A while later, Armin and I were back in control, coffees and phones in hand. I was reminded of the early days on the job because for the first time in ages, I felt compelled to look at the displays. I tried to find something interesting to distract me on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting up at the cameras. I stole a glance at Armin and saw that he was the same, and like me, he was trying to keep it on the down low. I was feeling a little cold, so I told Armin that I was going to grab a hoodie from my locker. He nodded without a word. I stepped out of the control room and made for the end of the hallway where the lockers were. As I was slipping my hoodie over my head, I saw the glow of the locker room lights through the fabric, and for the briefest moment, I thought that I saw them flicker. I yanked my hoodie all the way on and looked around the room. Things seemed normal. I started back toward control, walking quicker than I had when I left. I nearly leapt right back out of my hoodie when a resounding zap and snap shook the hallway. The lights went out all at once, and I was in pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, which was in my pocket. As I drew it out, I lost hold of it. It clattered and slid on the concrete floor. Shit, I said as I felt frantically along the ground. The cement flooring was so cold under my hands. I heard another snapping sound from the far end of the hall. I was still blind, my phone unrecovered. And then an orb of light appeared from where the sound had come. It seared my eyes against the otherwise pitch black. I gasped as the orb began to hover toward me. My phone. I needed my phone. I looked down at the now illuminated floor and saw where it had fallen to. I snatched it and held it up, swiping frantically, trying to get my light on. My flashlight came on just as the orb came within 5 feet of me. Armin? What the hell? I wasn't sure if that was you out here. Sorry. Who else would it have been? I growled. You could have said something instead of scaring the crap out of me. Armin gestured with his hand, pressing his palm downward. Quiet. The power's off again. He was right. The power was off and the inmates could break out again, same as the last shift. I shut my mouth and nodded. Armin helped me up. I dusted myself off, taking a few deep breaths, just trying to calm the hell down. I shouldn't have taken my time. The door opposite of control, the one that led to the block, flew open, slamming against the door stopper so hard that it crushed the thing entirely. That door was supposed to be locked, but we never bothered with it since it just made patrols more tedious. Another mistake. That because now Hector, one of the biggest and baddest of our inmates, was barreling down the hall straight for us. Oh shit, Armin roared. He snatched his baton from his hip. That was when I realized that I left mine in control and stood ready as Hector ran at us. I held up my phone, shining a light on the inmate. Ain't no way, Hector screamed as he thumped down the hallway. Ain't no way I'm staying in there. Armin leapt up to meet Hector, swinging his baton as hard as he could. The big guy didn't even seem to notice him. Maybe he was blinded by my flashlight, or maybe he just didn't have time for either of us. In any case, Armin's baton made clean and brutal contact with the side of Hector's head, sending the giant tumbling to the ground. He nearly fell on me. We thought that he was out cold, and we were wrong. As we approached, Hector swung at Armin with a punch that would have killed him if he hadn't ducked away, letting the fist glance off his head instead of crushing it. Do it, Hector shouted. Do it, or I'll do you in first. The giant was grabbing Armin now and slamming him against the wall. I had to act. I had to somehow neutralize him. I ran at Hector, leapt and kicked his head. I guess his skull was already fractured from the baton hit earlier, because when I laid him out against the wall, his head caved in entirely with a crunch that I'll never forget. A zap, a snap, and the lights came back on. I turned away, now wanting to look at what was left of Hector, but then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, right next to the door that Hector had broken, was that same sort of wrongness. The air there wasn't right. The air was bent or twisted. For a moment, that twisted air started to take shape that vaguely resembled a man, but then it faded. The end of the hallway was normal aside from the fact that a prisoner had destroyed the door to the block. A prisoner who I had just killed. Shit. Armin cursed as he shoved Hector off himself. Oh shit. Oh god, no. I strained to listen, feeling lightheaded. Were any other inmates free of their cells? I couldn't hear a thing from the block. All was quiet. I stood and walked toward the busted door. Armin whispered from behind me, "Stop." I ignored him. Reaching the end of the hall, I turned and looked out at the block. Everything was quiet. Apart from Hector's cell door, which had blown off its hinges so fiercely that it fell down from the second story and onto the tables below, everything was normal. Not a single pair of eyes peeked past cell bars at me, despite the fact that every last one of those prisoners had heard the commotion. My memory of the remainder of that day is really fuzzy. I know that we called in the breakout and the downed inmate right away. Then we got cleaned up. Then we got interviewed by the warden and then by the police. Then we went home because we weren't in any trouble or anything. We'd only defended ourselves. Basic stuff, right? Both of us were offered paid time off. I took the 2 weeks, but Armin being Armin, he turned down the offer. Said that he was fine and wanted to keep working, and so they let him. I used the 2 weeks to get my head right. I flipped my sleep schedule to what's considered normal, and then I saw some family, saw a ball game, saw an old friend, the works. The days were great. The nights weren't. I would toss and turn, that image of Hector vivid in my mind. Eventually I would fall asleep, and every time I would dream of that cold hallway and that wrongness. And let me tell you, waking from nightmares in the dark of night was way worse than waking up in the daylight. By the time that I got back to work, I was relieved. Working through the night and snoozing during the day suited me just fine. I had a hop in my step as I got back to the clink. I had nearly forgotten all that nonsense about the stalker. The Hector thing was far from gone, as you would expect, but I could push that aside well enough. Simon, the fellow who had filled in for me during those 2 weeks, briefed me during my shift, and he had some great news at long last. Those useless old locks had been replaced with new ones that no amount of strength could bust through. So now, even if the power went out, the inmates would stay in their cells. Thank God for that. But Simon also had bad news. During my 2 weeks off, 8 inmates had died. All suicide. They also told me that Armin hadn't been acting right. Honestly, that spooked me more than anything. Armin, of all people, tilted. I figured Simon was exaggerating and brushed it off. After the briefing and getting changed, I paced down the hallway to control, taking care not to look at the spots where Hector had laid. Stepping into the control room, I found Armin looking down at his baton. He smiled big when he saw me and gave me one of his bear hugs. I could tell that he was glad to have me back. "How are things?" I asked him as I sat in my chair. You know," Armin said without looking at me. "The schizos have been doing schizo things, the usual." I had more so meant to ask how things were outside of work, but I didn't press for that. "Yeah, I heard. 8 suicides, dang. We'll have a state-level investigation come down on us soon." "Ha," Armin chuckled. "Already in the works. Investigators will be here in a few weeks, but not state level, even higher than that. A couple CIA agents will be coming down. Weird, huh?" My stomach fluttered a little. Yeah, weird for sure. I saw that vivid image of Hector's caved-in skull in my mind's eye. "You don't think we're in trouble, do you?" Armin raised his eyebrows. No way, don't sweat it. It's not us, it's the weirdos that are the problem." "Yeah, you're right, I agreed. Let's just keep doing our thing and let the bigwigs sort out the crazies." The first half of the shift went by pretty quick. On our first patrol, Phil was back to his holiday, so we hushed him up. Though he gave us a mouthful and a half about how he was safe because he was innocent. A few of the other inmates asked for transfers, including that rat, Mike, but Armin and I just ignored them. I tried joking with my partner a couple of times as we went, but he just smirked back. It was when we were pivoting to head back to control from the far end of the block that Armin froze. I didn't even notice at first. I walked a dozen or so paces before realizing he wasn't at my side. Spinning around, I saw him frozen mid-step. As though he were playing a game of red light, green light, and the light had just turned red. I gave an awkward smile. Armin, you alright, bud? He was staring to my side, eyes wide as hell. I looked to my side, saw nothing there at all. Frowning, I said, Armin, hey, you creeping me out, man. Suddenly, he shook himself and said, one sec, I gotta hit the bathroom. I wanted to ask what his deal was all of a sudden, but he had turned and gone toward the bathroom before I could even open my mouth. Confused and a little annoyed, I went back to control on my own. When Armin got back and 5 minutes after me, he acted all normal. Armin, I said to him, we gotta talk about what happened out there. He shrugged. Taco Bell. Armin, cut it. He grinned at me. What do you want me to say? The Taco Bell from earlier wanted to come out all at once. It's a matter of life and death, you know. He patted his belly. I'm feeling all better now, though. Huh? I grunted. If you say so. We grabbed our coffees and our phones and settled in for the hour-long break before our next patrol. I glanced over at Armin while I kicked back and saw him staring at his baton more often than not. His eyes also darted over my shoulder a few times at the control room door. It was one of those doors that had a glass window built into the top half of it. Him staring at it creeped me out, but I didn't want to look over my shoulder and make it a whole thing, you know. It was nearly time for our next patrol when I came across a video that I thought was hilarious. Oh man, Armin, check this. Armin stood up so fast that his chair rolled back and clattered against the back wall. At the exact same time, the lights flickered. Armin, what the hell? Gotta get something for my car. Be back in a sec. What? Armin! He burst out of the room, running down the hall toward the front of the prison. I was stunned for a moment, thinking to myself about how right Simon had been about Armin. And then I got up and turned around to go to the parking lot and see. I tripped over myself and fell backward when I saw who or what rather was standing behind the door's glass window. My breath rose in a visible plume in front of me as I stared. A corpse stood there, all blurry and scratchy. Or at least I thought that I had seen a corpse for a moment. But I blinked and then there was nothing at all. Distant visions of a cracked open head and a bloodied body echoed in my mind. But otherwise, the only thing I saw through the window was the stone wall beyond. Holy shit, was I losing it too? Brushing my tangled, wriggling thoughts aside, I went out and after Armin. I dashed out to the parking lot and looking at his go-to parking spot, I saw that he was gone. I looked around the rest of the lot, knowing that it was futile because Armin was a creature of habit and he always parked in his usual spot. His car wasn't there. He was gone. Bewildered, I went back inside. It was bad enough that I left the block unattended for those few minutes. I needed to get back in there and close out my shift. I told myself that Armin's Taco Bell predicament had hit him again. Hard enough this time that he needed to see a doctor. He was the type to be embarrassed over stuff like that and too proud to talk about it, so he ran off without a word. It was the next evening, not long before my shift, that the warden himself called me to tell me that Armin had quit. I didn't believe him at first, but when the warden started getting pissed at me for questioning it, I realized he wasn't kidding around. Armin had quit, no notice or anything. My partner of 2 years and my good friend left without a word. I texted him right away and even tried calling him, but he had ghosted me. I went into work that night because what else was I going to do? Simon filled in for Armin and I wondered if he was going to become my new full-time partner. He was friendly, I had to admit, but he wasn't nearly as easygoing as Armin had been. Simon and I were on our first patrol when it happened to me again. We were strolling down the block when, for a fraction of a second, I saw a dude peeking out from around a corner, from a spot where there shouldn't have been anyone. It was the faintest thing at the edge of my vision, but I could have sworn there was a big guy standing there, one eye and shoulder poking out from behind the wall. You alright? Simon had asked with a frown. I shook myself. All good. Have a headache, that's all. Let's keep going. I started to worry that I was actually losing it. A lot of messed up stuff had happened on our block recently and my mental was all rattled. Maybe I needed to take another break. Paid time off be damned. A couple weeks or maybe even a month. Maybe I needed to go on a proper vacation to hit the beaches and really unwind. I was thinking about that in the control room when I happened to glance up at the cams to see that corpse once more. It was gone after I had blinked, but this big dude had filled every display like he was right up by the cameras. And the after image in my mind was more vivid somehow. The eyes were blank and glowing. The mouth was drooping and half open. The one side of the skull was caved in. Ropes of brain dangling out over the face. It was nauseating even through the grainy display. I looked over at Simon and saw him chuckling at something that he was watching on his phone, unperturbed. I decided that I really was losing it right then, and after my shift, I put in a request to get some time off. The warden was pissed because Armin had just ditched too, but I was upfront about my mental being in bad shape, so he gave in and told me that he would let me off in a few weeks once he had found someone to cover for me. And that brings us to the present day. I'm still waiting for my vacation, but hanging in there. Simon's been a godsend. He really looks out for me. Even now he's gone out to get his coffees, and the good coffees, not the crap we make here in Control. I've been having my hallucination more than I would care to admit. It's that same guy peeking at me from the edge of my vision and from around corners. The part of my mind that isn't rational tells me that it's Hector haunting me. The sensible part tells me that I need a break from all this. Anyway, I thought sharing all of this with you people on the internet might help me unwind a bit while I wait for my time off. It's crazy working in a place like this and definitely not something that I would recommend. Dang, my fingers are getting stiff. It's too cold in here. I should probably post this and hop off till I get my coffee and warm up. And now the lights are flickering. Let me guess. Next to zap and a snap and lights go out. Right.
I would say the most beneficial part of the sales was a lot of the content were things.
dead and roasted. What can I get you?
Wow. This was one of those rare stories where, while I was recording it, I got goosebumps on my neck, and at one point, my eyes watered. Do you know that feeling? That fear that begs you to look behind you, but to such a great extent that you can't even bring yourself to look. Keep that idea in mind. You'll understand soon. This story, titled The Standing Tree, from an Australian gentleman named E.G. Scott, is an extremely disturbing story of a school and a nearby tree. Something in the 90s was taking children. Be warned, this story will sit with you long after you're done listening. There are places that do not want you. I know this now, with the certainty of a man who has felt it, though it took me years to understand what that feeling meant. In the mid-90s, I arrived in a small town in northern New South Wales. I will not name it specifically, and I beg of you not to try to find it. I moved to take up my first teaching position. I was 24 years old, recently qualified, and possessed of that peculiar optimism that comes from never having been tested by the world. The school sat at the end of a road that the locals called Boundary Road, but that was not its official name. It was a building of weatherboard and corrugated iron that had been standing since the 1920s, its paint peeling in the fierce summer sun, its windows foggy with age. Behind it, beyond a rusted wire fence that marked the official edge of the school grounds, lay the bush. I use that word deliberately. Not forest or woodland. Those tame English words that conjure images of managed copses and walking paths. This was true bush in the Australian sense. Dense, ancient, indifferent. Scribbly gums and ironbarks grew in thickets so tight that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Lantana choked the undergrowth and impenetrable tangles, and the constant buzz of insects created a wall of sound that seemed to press against your skull. The children were forbidden from entering it, of course. The fence was there for their purpose, though it was hardly necessary. Most of them would not go near it anyway. It was the tree that kept them away. I first noticed it during my second week. I was supervising the lunch break, watching the children scatter across the playing field, like seeds thrown from a hand, when I realized that none of them went near the back fence. They played in the middle of the field, clustered near the building, kicked balls along the gravel paths. But that far corner, where the fence met the bush, remained empty. It was as if an invisible boundary had been drawn across the grass, one that every child instinctively understood. When I asked Helen Marchetti, the 3-year teacher who had been at the school for 15 years, she laughed, like when you do when you're trying to dismiss something that you don't want to discuss. "Oh, that's just the tree," she said. "The kids always have avoided it, probably something their parents told them." "What tree, exactly?" She pointed with her chin, that Australian gesture that manages to be both precise and dismissive. "That big dead one, just past the fence. The gray one, you can see it from here if you look." I looked, and once I saw it, I could not understand how I had failed to notice it before. It stood perhaps 20 meters beyond the fence, a massive gray eucalyptus that rose above the canopy, like a finger pointed at the sky. It was dead, that much was obvious, from the way its bark had fallen away in great sheets, leaving the trunk smooth and pale, almost bone-like in its nakedness. No leaves clung to its branches, no birds nested in its hollows. It simply stood there, stark against the green of the surrounding bush, as if it belonged to a different world entirely. The other trees seemed to lean away from it, though I told myself that was merely an effect of the light. "It's actually technically within the school boundary," Helen continued, "if you go by the original survey maps. The fence was put up in the 70s to keep the kids from wandering too far. But the trees on our side of the line, just barely. She paused, and something flickered across her face. A shadow of an expression I couldn't quite read. The older teachers, back when I started, they used to call it the standing tree. Capital letters like it was a proper name. Why is that? Oh, I don't know. They never told me, and I never cared to ask. That night in my small rented house, I lay awake thinking about the tree. It shouldn't have bothered me. I was a rational man, educated in the sciences, trained to dismiss superstition as the remnant of a less enlightened age. There had been something in Helen's voice, something in the way she had turned away after speaking, something that stayed with me. And when I finally slept, I dreamt of standing at the base of that pale trunk, looking up into branches that spread across the sky like the veins of a bloodless hand. Over the following weeks, I learned more, not from asking directly. I quickly discovered that direct questions about the tree were met with evasion or silence, but from listening, from noticing. The groundskeeper, a taciturn man named Doug who had worked at the school since the 1960s, would not mow the grass within 50 meters of the fence. When I asked him why, he said only that the mower didn't work well on that patch. The principal, Mrs. Davies, scheduled all outdoor events on the opposite side of the building. And the children, well, the children had their own rules. I overheard them sometimes, whispering to each other in the corridors. Never look at it after dark. Don't say its name out loud. If you hear it calling, put your fingers in your ears and count to 100. Children's nonsense, I thought. Folklore that accumulates around any mysterious object, passed down from older siblings and neighborhood friends, and embellished with each telling. But I noticed that even the boldest of them, the ones who always pushed boundaries in every other way, they gave that corner of the field a wide berth. It was an afternoon in late April when I finally went to see it for myself. The days were growing shorter by then, the fierce summer heat giving way to the mild coolness of autumn. I had stayed late to prepare materials for the following week. I was teaching Year 5, and we were beginning a unit on Australian colonial history. And by the time I finished, the sun was already low, painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. The school was empty. Even Doug had gone home by then, his ute crunching down the gravel drive half an hour earlier. I was alone. I don't know what compelled me. Curiosity, perhaps, or the need to prove myself that it was merely a tree, merely dead wood standing in ordinary bush. I locked my classroom, walked across the playing field, and climbed the fence. The bush closed around me immediately. One moment I was standing in open ground, the evening light still warm on my face, and the next I was in shadow, surrounded by the smell of eucalyptus and decay. The ground was thick with fallen leaves, dry and crackling beneath my feet. Ahead, I could see the pale trunk of the tree through the scrub. It was larger than I expected. Up close, the trunk was perhaps 3 meters in diameter, rising straight and smooth for 10 meters before splitting into those bare, reaching branches. The bark that remained, a few patches near the base, was gray and rough, covered in strange markings that might have been natural and might have been something else. I couldn't tell. The light was failing. I stood there for a moment, looking up. The sky was visible through the branches, a darkening blue streaked with the last traces of sunset. A crow called somewhere in the distance, its cry harsh and lonely. The bush was very still. And then I heard it. A sound from the other side of the trunk. Something moving, something large. It was the sound of weight shifting against bark, a slow, steady scraping, as if something were climbing or descending on the far side of the tree. I could hear it clearly in the silence, the rasp of rough skin against wood, the faint creak of dead branches, the suggestion of immense size, moving with terrible patience. I should have run. Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to turn and flee, to get back over that fence and into the open ground of the playing field. But I didn't. Instead, driven by some impulse I still cannot explain, I walked around the trunk. Nothing. The far side of the tree was empty. Just more bare trunk, more fallen leaves, more bush stretching away into the gathering darkness. Whatever I had heard, if I had heard anything at all, was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, my breath coming fast. The light was almost gone now, the sky above the branches fading from blue to purple to black. I needed to leave. I needed to get back. Then the wind came. It was not a natural wind. There was no rustle in the surrounding trees or movement in the undergrowth. It came from directly above me, a cold blast of air that descended from the branches like breath, like something exhaling. It was so cold on my skin that it hurt, a chill that bit through my shirt and into my flesh. It made my skin tighten up, and my eyes even watered. It smelled of old things, of deep places, of something that had been waiting there a very long time. I ran. I crossed the distance to the fence, climbed it, then walked briskly back to my car. I remember sitting in the driver's seat, my hands trembling so badly that I could barely find the keys in my pocket. There were tears streaming down my face, though I wasn't actually crying, not in any emotional sense. My body was simply reacting to something my mind was not ready for. I drove home quietly. I even forgot to turn on the radio. Usually I'd stop at the pub for dinner, a bit of a Friday tradition. But I didn't do that. I went straight to my house, locked the door behind me, and lay in the dark until morning. I think I fell asleep, but I couldn't be sure. It was one of those nights where you open your eyes, the sun is out, and you can't tell whether you fell asleep or not. In the days that followed, I told myself I'd imagined it. The sound in that cold, the sense of presence, all of it could be explained by fatigue or suggestion, the power of accumulated rumors working on an impressionable mind. I was new to the area, still adjusting to the rhythms of rural life. I'd allowed myself to be spooked by children's stories and old wives' tales. But I did not go near the fence again. And when I looked out across the playing field during lunch breaks, watching the children at their games, I was careful not to let my gaze linger on that far corner, where the gray branches reached above the canopy. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I learned more about the tree that winter, not by seeking the knowledge out. I wanted nothing to do with it, but because knowledge has a way of finding you when you've attracted its attention. The Railway Hotel was the kind of pub that exists in every Australian country town. A broad veranda, a public bar worn smooth by generations of elbows, and a cast of regulars who seemed to have grown out of the floorboards like fungi. I went there occasionally on Friday evenings, more for the company than the beer. And it was on one such evening that I found myself sitting next to old Stan Williamson. Stan claimed to have been born in the district before the First World War, which would have made him nearly 90, though he looked older still. His face was textured with deep creases, and his hands like old tree roots, obviously a man who had spent his life clearing from farmland. He drank rum and milk, an old bushman's drink, he said, good for the constitution. And he spoke rarely, only when he had something worth saying. I don't remember how the conversation turned to the school, or to the bush behind it. Perhaps I mentioned where I worked, or he simply knew. the way everyone in small towns knows everything about everyone. But at some point, he set down his glass and looked at me with eyes that were suddenly sharp behind their old, heavy lids. "You've seen it, haven't you? The standing tree," he said. I looked at him and swallowed. I didn't need to answer. He already knew. "The Gamerule," he continued, his voice roughened by decades of tobacco and hard living. "The black fellas who lived here before us, they never would camp near that spot. Never hunted there either. Wouldn't even walk through that part of the bush if they could help it. Even before the tree died, they stayed away." "Do you know where that is?" Dan took a long breath, the rum and milk leaving a pale film on his upper lip. "My grandfather knew a family," he said slowly. "An elder, one of the last who still remembered the days. This was back in the 20s, maybe earlier. My grandfather asked him about that tree. Asked him what was wrong, why his mom avoided it. And the old man, he got this look on his face, like he was trying to explain something to a child, something the child couldn't possibly understand." He paused, staring into his glass, as if the memory was floating. He said, "Something lived there, had always lived there, before the white came, before the black came, before anything, before the land was, which didn't make any sense to my grandfather. Something in the ground of the tree, or something that grew into the tree. They couldn't explain it proper, said their language didn't have right words for it. Maybe no language did. What kind of something?" Sam turned to look at him, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Something like fear, but not excitement. It was like it had lived in his bones for 90 years and would live there until he died. "The kind you don't ask about, man. And you just leave alone." He finished his drink and stood, joints cracking like dry timber. "My advice, find another school, another town. Get as far from that tree as you can, and don't ever go back." He left without another word. I stayed longer, watching the condensation run down my untouched glass, feeling the weight of those words settle over me like earth on my coffin. I didn't ask anyone else. I put my head down, taught my classes, marked my papers, and tried to forget. The months passed. Summer came again, then autumn, then winter. The tree stood unchanged on the edge of my vision, pale and patient, waiting. A new school year began. New children filled my classroom, eager faces looking up at me with that particular mix of hope and suspicion that 10-year-olds have for new teachers. I taught them mathematics and history and science. I watched them play in the field during lunch, their games following the same invisible boundaries that their predecessors had observed. Life went on, but beneath its surface, something was shifting. Something was coming. And when it finally arrived in 1995, it came for a child named Thomas Bennett. The morning Tommy disappeared was unremarkable in every way. It was a Thursday. I know because Thursdays were when I taught Year 5 the fundamentals of written expression, and I had prepared a lesson on descriptive language that I was rather proud of. The sky was overcast, a heavy, dark day with the clouds sitting low, and the air smelled of coming rain. The children were restless, They always seemed to be before a storm, and I had to speak sharply twice to settle them down. Tommy Bennett was not in my class. He was a Year 3 student, taught by Helen Marchetti, a small boy with red hair and freckles who I only knew by sight. He had been at the school since kindergarten, the son of a mechanic and a checkout operator at the local supermarket. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary child. The first I heard of anything wrong was at afternoon recess. I was on playground duty, walking the perimeter of the field with a cup of lukewarm tea, when I noticed Helen standing near the back fence, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. Her face was white. "Have you seen Tommy Bennett?" she asked when I approached. Her voice was pitched higher than usual. "He was here at the beginning of the break. Ryan Coulter saw him walking toward the back fence, and now I can't find him." I looked toward the fence. The bush beyond was dark beneath the overcast sky, the gray shape of the tree barely visible through the scrub. I gulped. "He can't have gone over," I said. "The children don't go near." "I know they don't. I know they don't." Helen's eyes were fixed on the fence. "But Ryan said he saw Tommy walking that way. Said he called out to him. But Tommy didn't turn around. He just kept walking." We searched the school first. Every classroom and storeroom, every corner of the building. Then the grounds, the equipment shed, the outdoor toilets, the bins behind the canteen. Mrs. Davies called an emergency assembly, lined the children up in the hall and counted them twice. Tommy Bennett was not among them. The police arrived at 2:30. By then, the threatened rain had begun to fall, a light drizzle that would continue through the afternoon and into the evening. I watched from my classroom window as officers in blue uniforms walked the fence line, spoke into their radios, formed a search party, and entered the bush. They were out there for hours. When they emerged just before dark, their faces told us everything. They had found nothing. Not a single footprint, nor a trace of torn clothes. No tell that a child had ever passed that way. The undergrowth was undisturbed. The fence showed no marks of climbing. Thomas Bennett had simply ceased to exist. That night, the town gathered at the community hall. Parents held their children close. Volunteers organized themselves into search parties. Someone put up a large-scale map of the area, marking possible routes a lost child might have taken. Torches were distributed, whistles handed out, phone numbers exchanged. The police established a command post and set up a hotline. But I noticed that none of the local people, none of those who had lived in that town for generations, joined the parties that searched the bush behind the school. They manned the phones, made sandwiches, drove the roads looking for any sign of movement. But they did not go into those trees. When I asked one of the older men why, he looked at me with something like pity. "You go in there at night," he said quietly. "You might not come out." But, I thought, would that not be a good reason to look for Tommy there? The search continued for 3 days. Police from the surrounding districts joined in. A helicopter searched over the bush, rotors beating the air. Dogs were brought in too, trained animals that could supposedly track a scent through any terrain. But the dogs refused to go near the fence. They whined, they paced, they pulled against their leads. Their handlers were baffled. In 20 years, one of them said, he had never seen animals behave that way. The school remained closed. Parents kept their children at home. The town, usually so busy with the rhythms of rural life, fell into an awful silence. On the 4th day, I went back. I don't know why. It might have been guilt. I had known about the tree, I had felt what was there, and I had said nothing. Maybe it was hope, too. the irrational belief that I might find some clue the police had missed, a trace that would bring Tommy home to his parents. But now I wonder if it was simply that the tree had called to me, had planted something in my mind during that cold encounter in April, and I was finally answering. The afternoon was mild. The sky was clear after days of rain. The school grounds were deserted, sealed off by police tape that fluttered in the breeze. I parked on the road, climbed the boundary fence at the rear of the property, and made my way across the empty playing field. The tree was waiting for me. That's how it felt, at least, as I climbed the back fence and pushed into the bush. As the shadows closed around me and the silence deepened, I had the overwhelming sense of approaching something that had been expecting me, that had always been expecting me. The undergrowth parted before my feet, as if guiding me forward. The branches overhead formed a tunnel through which the pale trunk glowed like a beacon. I stopped at the base of the tree. The marks I'd noticed before, the strange patterns in the remaining bark, were more visible now, clearer in the afternoon light. They may have been carvings, I thought. Maybe they were scars of some ancient rituals. Or maybe it was nothing, merely the random workings of weather and time on dead wood. I looked up. The branches spread above me like a web, but nothing moved in them. Nothing waited there that I could see. I began to walk around the trunk, and I heard a sound. It was coming from above me, from high in the branches, from the place where the trunk split and the dead limbs reached for the sky. It was a wet sound, a thick, deliberate sound. The sound of something feeding. I have tried in the years since to describe what I heard in that moment, but the words fail me. The closest I can come is this. Imagine meat being pulled from a bone. Imagine the slow separation of sinew from muscle, the stretch and snap of tissue giving away. And imagine it amplified, extended, savored. Whatever was up there, it wasn't merely eating. It was enjoying itself. And there was something else beneath the sounds of consumption. A sound like breathing, slow, deep, and wet. A sound that vibrated in my chest and made my teeth chatter. I could not bring myself to look up. My body simply refused. Every muscle was locked in place, every joint frozen. I stood at the base of that dead tree with tears streaming down my face. These tears were of pure animalistic terror. And I listened to something eat what I knew in my heart was left of Tommy Bennett. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes, maybe hours. Time had ceased to have meaning. All that existed to me in that moment was the sound. The endless wet, crunching and tearing of flesh. And the cold certainty that if I looked up, if I saw what was up in that tree, I would never be able to unsee it. That knowing would destroy me. When I finally moved, it was not a conscious decision. My legs, fueled by instinct, simply began to carry me backward, step by shuffling step, my eyes fixed on the ground before me. I did not run. I was too afraid that running would attract its attention, would draw its gaze down from the branches to the small figure retreating through the undergrowth. I walked, slowly and steadily, and I did not look back. I climbed the fence, crossed the field. I entered the school building through the side door that I knew would be unlocked. I then went to the office and picked up the phone. There's something in the tree," I said when the police answered. My voice was calm but detached, as if someone else were speaking through me. "The big, dead tree behind the school. You need to look in the tree." They found him the next morning. I was not there when they brought the bucket truck, nor was I there when they extended the lift into the branches. I was at home, sitting in my dark living room, staring at a TV that wasn't on. I heard about it later. Everyone in town heard about it, though no one spoke of it openly. The local newspaper ran a brief article the following week. "Missing child found," the headline read. "Body of Thomas Bennett, 8, recovered in bushland behind local school." The article mentioned that the body had been found in a tree and had been identified by parents. It mentioned that the cause of death was still under investigation, though police were treating it as suspicious. It mentioned that counseling services were being made available to students and staff. What it didn't mention, what no newspaper would say, was the condition in which Tommy Bennett had been found. I learned this only later, from a police officer who drank too much at the railway hotel one night and let slip more than he should have. The boy had been wedged into a hollow where two branches met, some 15 meters above the ground. Parts of him had been removed. Others had been partially consumed. The body had been there for at least 3 days. Like something had been storing him there, the officer said, slurring his words. "Like a leopard stores its kills. Wedged him up there and came back when it was hungry for more." I said nothing. I didn't have anything to say. The school reopened the following week. A new fence was erected, taller and stronger than the old one, topped with barbed wire. For safety, Mrs. Davies told the parents at the emergency meeting, to keep the children from wandering into the bush. No one mentioned the tree, of course, and no one suggested it should be cut down. There was no acknowledgement by it in any official capacity that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. But the children knew. Children always know in some way. The whispers in the corridors grew more urgent, more specific, and the invisible boundary around that far corner of the field grew wider still. Life again went on. It had to. There were lessons to teach and papers to mark, schedules to keep. The routines of the school year continued, each day following the last in the same familiar pattern. Tommy Bennett's desk was removed from Helen's classroom. His parents moved away, to Sydney, some said, or maybe Brisbane. His friends grew quieter for a while, then gradually returned to their games and their laughter. Children are resilient. It's both their gift and their curse. But I was not resilient. Something had broken in me that afternoon at the base of the tree. Some necessary illusion about the nature of the world had been stripped away from me, and I could not rebuild it. I did my job. I smiled at my students. I attended staff meetings and contributed to discussions about curriculum development. But I was hollow inside, emptied out, just waiting. The tree still stood at the edge of the playing field. I could see it from my classroom window, its horrible shape above the new fence. Every time I looked at it, I heard the sounds again. The wet tearing, the slow crunch, the deep, satisfied breathing. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was only a matter of time before it happened again. 2 years passed. I should have left. Every rational part of my mind told me to request a transfer, find a position in another district. But I didn't. I couldn't. The tree had its hooks in me now, and some part of me understood that running wouldn't solve the problem. Whatever had taken root in that dead trunk, could it follow me? Would it be waiting at every fence line and forest edge until I dealt with it here, at its source? So I stayed. I taught. I watched the children carefully, taking note of any who strayed too close to the boundary, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of danger. I became known as strict, perhaps even harsh, the teacher who would not tolerate any deviation from the rules, the one who spoke sharply to anyone who approached the back fence. The other staff thought I was still processing what had happened to Tommy, and they weren't entirely wrong. In 1997, I was assigned a new class, Year 6, the oldest students in the school, on the cusp of high school and independence. Among them were 2 boys who would test every limit I'd ever set. Their names were Daniel Croft and Samuel Murray. They'd been friends since kindergarten. They had that bond that forms between kids who recognize something similar in each other. In this case, a shared contempt for authority and a bottomless appetite for trouble. They weren't cruel boys, not malicious. They simply didn't believe that rules applied to them. I recognized the type immediately. I'd taught dozens like them over the years. Normally, these kinds of students would respond well to firm boundaries and clear consequences. You establish your authority early, demonstrate that you will not be manipulated, and eventually reach an understanding. Daniel and Sam, however, they were different. They seemed to take my strictness as a personal challenge. The conflict began in the second week of term, when I caught them sneaking toward the back fence during lunch break. They were about 20 meters from it, far closer than any other student would venture, their eyes fixated on the gray shape of the tree visible above the new barbed wire. "Stop." They turned, their faces a blend of surprise and defiance that I'd come to expect. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked. Daniel, the bolder of the 2, shrugged with elaborate nonchalance. "Just looking, sir. Didn't know that was against the law." "You know the rules. No one goes near the fence, no one goes near the bush. Go back to the main field now." Sam smirked. "Is it because of the kid that got killed? Tommy something?" I felt something cold move through my chest. "Go now." They went, but I saw them exchange a glance as they walked away, and I knew that this wasn't over. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Sam became increasingly fixated on the tree. They kept asking questions in class that seemed designed to provoke me, about local history and indigenous legends, even unsolved crimes in the district. They whispered to other students in the corridors, spreading stories that grew more lurid with each telling. They tested my patience at every opportunity, pushing closer and closer to the boundary whenever they thought I wasn't watching. The confrontation I'd been dreading came during a history lesson in the 3rd week of term. We were discussing the impact of European settlement on indigenous communities, a sensitive topic I always approached with care, when Daniel raised his hand. "Sir, what about the sacred sites, the places the Aboriginal people wouldn't go?" I should have seen it coming. "There were many such places," I said carefully. "Some were sacred in a positive sense, ceremonial grounds, places of significance. Others were avoided for different reasons." "What kind of reasons?" Sam asked, and I could hear the trap being laid. "Various reasons. Some places were associated with dangerous spirits or..." "Like the tree behind the school?" The classroom went silent. 24 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting for an answer. Daniel was smiling, the infuriating smile of a child who believes he has outmaneuvered an adult. "That is not what we're discussing today," I said, keeping my voice level. "But it's the same thing, isn't it?" A girl named Jessica spoke up from the back row. One of the quieter students, usually. Not given to confrontation. "My nan says the black fellas never went near that tree. Says it's been there forever and that something bad lives in it." "My dad reckons it's haunted," another boy added. "Reckons that's why Tommy Bennett died there. The tree got him." The tree did not get anyone. My voice was pointed. Tommy Bennett's death was a tragedy, and I won't have it turned into a ghost story for your entertainment. "Then what did happen?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes bright. "You were there, sir. You found him. Everyone knows that. So what really happened? What did you see?" The room was very still. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the distant shouts of younger children at play, the whisper of wind through the open window. And beneath it all, like a pulse, like a heartbeat, I could hear the echo of those sounds in the tree. The wet tearing, the slow crunch, the deep and joyful breath. "I saw a child dead," I said quietly. "I saw grief and horror and loss. That's what I saw, Daniel. That's what death looks like. It's no story, it's not an adventure, it's the end of everything that person was or could have been. And if you had any decency, any respect for Tommy or his family, you would stop treating it as entertainment." Something flicked across Daniel's face. Shame, I hoped, or the beginning of understanding. But Sam leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. "What about the tree, though?" Sam pressed. "Jessica's nan isn't the only one who says things about it. Everyone in town knows there's something wrong with it. Everyone knows kids aren't supposed to go near it. But no one will say why. Don't you think that's weird?" "Some things are better left alone," I said. "That's what adults always say when they don't want to tell you the truth." "No," I met his eyes, held them. "That's what adults say when the truth is too dangerous for children to hear. When knowing something could put you in harm's way. There are things in this world you are not equipped to understand or to fight. That tree is one of them, and if you value your life, Samuel Murray, you will stay away from it." The bell rang. The students filed out in unusual silence, casting glances back at me as they went. Daniel and Sam were last to leave, and at the door, Daniel paused. "You know what's in the tree, don't you, sir?" he said. "You've seen it. Get to your next class, Daniel." He smiled, infuriating me even more, but I didn't say anything, and he walked away. One afternoon, I overheard them talking to a group of younger children near the water fountain. "My brother told me what really happened," Daniel was saying. "The kid didn't just die. Something took him in the tree. It grabbed him and pulled him up into the branches and—" "That's enough," my voice cut through. The younger children scattered like startled birds, but Daniel and Sam stayed where they were. "We weren't doing anything wrong, sir," Sam said. "Just talking." "You were scaring the younger students with ghost stories. That stops now." Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "They're not ghost stories, though. Something really did happen. We talked about Tommy Bennett before. That was real. Everyone knows it." What everyone knows and what is true are not always the same thing. They rolled their eyes, almost at the same time. Those kids were in sync. "I should have told someone about this," Should have gone to Mrs. Davies or spoken to their parents. Let someone know how obsessed they'd become with that tree. But I shook it off, and I told myself that they would lose interest eventually. They're kids. Their attention would move on to other forbidden things. I was wrong. The discovery came by accident. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd assigned the class a writing exercise, a personal narrative about a place that held significance to them. Most students wrote about their homes or their grandparents' farms, their favorite swimming hole. But when I collected Daniel's paper at the end of the lesson, I noticed that it was not the assignment he had handed in. It was a note, written in Sam's handwriting, folded into a tight square. Clearly it had been passed between them during class. He had not meant to give this to me. It read, "Friday night, after everyone's gone, we cut the fence and climb. Whoever chickens out first has to do the other's homework for a month. I bet there's nothing there anyway. Just some dead tree and old stories. We'll prove everyone wrong." Below it, Daniel's messier scrawl. "Deal, but I want to actually climb in it. Touch the top. That's the real test. Anyone can just walk up to it. But if we climb it, we're legends." I stood at my desk, the note shaking in my hand. I felt the world tilt. Friday night was tomorrow. They were going to climb the tree tomorrow night, after the staff left, after the grounds were empty, after there was no one to stop them. By then, school had ended. Both Daniel and Sam had disappeared into the crowd of departing students, and I could not find them. I went to Mrs. Davies, but she had already left for a meeting in town. I called the numbers listed in the school records, but no one answered at the Croft House, and the Murray line was engaged. I told myself I would catch them first thing Friday morning. I would pull them aside, show them the note, and make them understand the danger they were trying to court. I could not let them go near that tree. I wouldn't let it happen again. But Friday morning came, and Daniel was absent. A stomach bug, his mother said when she called the office. He would be back on Monday. And Sam, when I tried to speak with him before class, simply looked at me with those defiant eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. There's no plan, we're just mucking around." He was lying. I knew he was lying. But I had no proof beyond a confiscated note. And when I brought it to the principal, she told me I was welcome to stay after school to keep an eye out. Great. I watched Sam throughout the day, saw him watching the clock, and I felt the hours slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The night it happened was a Friday in late October. The days were growing longer again, the jacarandas blooming along the main street in cascades of purple. I'd stayed late at school, as I often did, marking assignments and preparing lessons for the following week. But this time I was not preparing lessons. Instead, I was waiting, watching the car park, hoping to catch the two before they could enact their plan. By 7 o'clock, the school was dark and silent. No sign of the boys. I told myself that perhaps they had abandoned the plan. Perhaps Daniel's illness had been real, had kept him from the rendezvous. Perhaps Sam had come to his senses. So I waited a while longer. And still, nothing happened. I drove home. I ate dinner without even tasting it, and then at 9 o'clock, my telephone rang. It was Sarah Murray, and even before she spoke, I knew. "Have you seen Sam?" Her voice sounded worried. "He was supposed to be home for dinner. I've called his friends and driven all the usual places, but Daniel Croft is missing too. His mother just rang me, said he snuck out when she thought he was in bed. No one has seen either of them since school let out." That painful cold in my chest was like a knife. I know where they are. The tree. What? Where? But I'd already hung up. I grabbed my keys and ran for the car, the note's words burning in my mind. We cut the fence and climb. Whoever chickens out first has to do the other's homework for a month. Of course they'd gone. The school was dark when I arrived. I parked at the front gate, leaving the engine running, and ran across the playing field. The grass was wet with dew. The air was heavy with the smell of approaching summer. And above me, the stars were cold and silent, indifferent to what was happening below. The fence had been cut. Someone had taken wire cutters to the mesh, creating a hole large enough for a child to crawl through. I squeezed through the gap, feeling the barbed wire catch at my shirt, and I plunged into the bush. The tree was ahead of me. I could see it through the scrub. And standing at its base, motionless, was a figure. Sam. He was alone. His back was to me, his head tilted upward, his body completely still. He might have been a statue carved from the same pale wood as the tree itself. He didn't react to my approach. He did not turn at the sound of my crashing footsteps. Sam. No response. I moved closer, my heart going mad, and I reached out to touch his shoulder. His skin was ice cold. Then I heard it. That sound from above. The wet, rhythmic crunching. The slow tearing of meat from bones. That deep breathing that seemed so happy. It vibrated my entire skeleton. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on poor Sam's face. His blank, staring face. His eyes fixed on something that I would not, could not see. And I wrapped my arms around his rigid body, lifting him from the ground. He was heavier than I expected, stiff and unyielding as if his muscles had locked up in terror and refused to release. I held him against my chest and walked. Again, I did not run. Running would make noise. It would attract predators, or a predator. So I walked painfully slow, one step at a time, while the sounds above us continued, while that cold wind began to blow from the branches, while every instinct I had screamed at me to drop the boy. The bush parted before me, and the fence appeared, the hole in its mesh a dark wound in the silver wire. I pushed through, carrying Sam still somehow, feeling the barbed wire tear at my skin. Then I stumbled out onto the playing field. Behind me, something moved in the tree. I heard the scrape of weight shifting against wood, the creaking of branches bending. And then, carrying across the empty field like the voice of a nightmare, I heard a sound that might have been a word. It might have been a name. But it could have been nothing at all. Whatever it was, it froze my blood and made me finally, truly run. Across the dew-wet grass toward the lights of the school. The police found Daniel Croft's remains a day later. He was in the tree, like Tommy Bennett before him, wedged into a hollow high in the branches. The official story was that he had fallen while climbing, that his injuries were consistent with impact trauma, and that Sam Murray had witnessed the accident and had been rendered catatonic with shock. Another tragedy, the papers concluded, but nothing suspicious, nothing criminal, nothing worth investigating further. I gave my statement 3 times to the local police, then to detectives from the regional command, then to some woman in a gray suit who never identified her agency. I told them exactly what had happened, how I'd found Sam, how I'd carried him out, how I'd heard sounds in the tree but had seen nothing. They wrote it all down. They thanked me for my cooperation, and I never heard from them again. Sam was taken to a psychiatric facility in Newcastle. His parents visited once, then twice, and then stopped coming. I heard later they had divorced. His mother had moved interstate, and his father had drunk himself into an early grave. Sam remained in the facility, unresponsive, unspeaking, staring at a wall that only he could see. I should have let it go. Really, I should have accepted that I had done everything I could, that 2 children were dead and 1 was destroyed, that there was nothing more to be done. The authorities had investigated, the case was closed, life would go on. But I couldn't do that, because that damned tree was still standing there. And as long as it stood, as long as whatever lived in it was still up there, more children would die. More parents would grieve, their lives destroyed. More innocent lives would be offered up to whatever ancient hunger had taken root in that place. I made my plan in the weeks that followed. It was simple, probably foolishly simple. I would return to the tree on a weekend when the school was empty. I would bring fuel and matches, and I would burn the standing tree to the ground. I knew the risks. The bush was dry, the fire danger was high. What I was planning to do was arson at best, environmental catastrophe at worst. But I'd heard the sounds, and I'd felt the cold. I'd seen what was left of Tommy Bennett and Daniel Croft, and I knew that no risk was too great if it meant ending this. Trust me, I considered chopping it down, but I don't think I'd last that long beneath the tree. Do you think whatever lived in it would let me do that? It was a Saturday afternoon. The school was deserted, the car park empty, and the buildings silent. I parked on a side street, out of sight, and I walked in carefully with a plastic container of petrol and a box of matches in my bag. The sun was hot on my shoulders. The cicadas screamed in the trees. The hole in that fence had been repaired, but I had brought wire cutters. I made a new, larger opening this time, pushing through into the bush. The undergrowth was thick after the spring rains, vines and ferns crowding the ground. But the path to the tree was clear. It always was. When I reached the trunk, I set down my bag and unscrewed the cap of the petrol container. The smell hit me immediately. My hands were steady. My mind was calm. I knew what I had to do. I began to pour. The petrol splashed against the pale bark, darkening it, running down in rivulets to pull at the base. I walked around the trunk, spreading the fuel as widely as I could, working quickly, methodically. I listened closely to the branches above, but they were silent. The thing in the tree was asleep, or was it waiting, or was it watching? No, I was wrong. I heard it then. Something moving on the bark, descending. I fumbled for the matches. My hands were trembling now. The calm had shattered, replaced by raw terror. I struck one match, then another, but they wouldn't catch. The heads kept crumbling against the strip. The crawling sound grew closer. I could hear the scrape of something against the wood. The slow, patient moving of something large descending the far side of that trunk. In seconds, it would round the curve of the bark, and in seconds I would see it. A third match. A fourth. They crumbled, useless, the phosphorus turning to dust. Police, don't move. The beam of a flashlight hit me full in the face. I stumbled backward, blinded, the matches scattering from my hand. Through the glare, I could see a uniformed figure, torch in one hand, the other raised in a gesture of command. Drop whatever you're holding and put your hands on your head." I dropped the empty petrol container. I raised my hands, and I heard behind me the sound of something retreating up the tree, climbing back into the branches, returning to its place of waiting. The officer who arrested me was young, barely out of training. He did not understand what he had interrupted. He saw a man dousing a tree with petrol very close to school property. To him, it was attempted arson, reckless endangerment, willful destruction of property. He did not see the thing in the branches, nor did he hear the sounds descending the tree. He saw only a crime, and he did his duty. I did not resist. There was no point to. I allowed myself to be handcuffed and to be led back through the fence, placed in the back of the police car. Apparently, he had followed me when I parked on the side street. As we drove away, I looked back at the school, at the dark line of the bush behind it, and even from there I saw its gray shape. It was still there. It would always be there. I had failed. The trial took 3 months. I was charged with attempted arson, trespass, and reckless endangerment of life. The prosecution painted me as a disturbed individual, one who had become obsessed with the deaths of children at the school where I taught, unable to accept that they had been tragic accidents. My lawyer argued diminished responsibility, citing the trauma I'd experienced, the stress of witnessing the aftermath of 2 deaths in my workplace. And the judge, he was sympathetic, or maybe pragmatic. I was sentenced to 18 months, suspended with mandatory psychological counseling. But officially, my teaching career was over. The school board terminated my employment immediately. No other district would hire me. I was a liability, a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. A man who had tried to burn down a tree near a school where children had died. It didn't matter that I'd been trying to protect those children. It didn't matter that I knew the truth. What mattered was the official record, and the official record said I was unstable. I left that town in the spring of 1998. I drove south, and eventually I settled in a coastal town where no one knew my name or my history. I took a job as an assistant manager at a restaurant chain, a job that asks nothing of you except punctuality and a willingness to follow instructions. More years passed. I grew older, and I never went back. But I never did forget. I never stopped wondering what had become of the boy I'd carried out of the bush that night. That boy who had seen what I had only heard. Unexpectedly, the answer came on an ordinary Tuesday in 2003. I was working the lunch shift, seating customers and managing reservations, when a woman approached the host stand. She was middle-aged, unremarkable, and had tired eyes. She asked for a table for one. As I led her to her seat, something about her face triggered a memory. I think it was the shape of her jaw and those brown eyes. I couldn't place why she was familiar at first. It was only when she ordered, when I saw her name on her card, that I understood. Murray. By then she had finished her meal, and against every instinct of self-preservation, I approached her table. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but before you leave, are you by any chance related to a boy named Samuel Murray? He would be about 18 now." She looked up at me, and I saw the recognition dawning in her eyes. Not of me specifically, we had never met, but the question. She knew what I was asking, and she knew why. "Oh, he is my cousin's son," she said. "I've actually just been to visit him in Newcastle." "Oh, how's he doing these days?" Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, round and round as she thought. Then she said, he's not the same. He'll never be the same, but he's improving, slowly. He started talking last year. After 6 years of silence, he finally started to speak. I swallowed. That's good. That's very good. The strange thing is, she hesitated, probably reconsidering how much she should be sharing with a stranger. The strange thing is what he said. His first words since after all those years of silence. I waited. He said, "It's in the tree." She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. "Does that mean anything to you?" The doctors couldn't make sense of it, but he kept saying it over and over. "It's in the tree." My God, I'm not sure what it was about this one, but this story really freaked me out. We moved recently to a new house, and it's the first time we have a room with one of those stereotypical tree right by the bedroom window situations, specifically the window in my son's room. I didn't give it a second thought until reading this story, but now I've got chills, and I might check on my son while he's sleeping when I'm done here. Thank you for listening. This has been Tales from the Break Room, the podcast where I share work-related scary stories. For more, go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and search for Tales from the Break Room, or simply search EerieCast. If you need a relief from the terror, join me over at my channel, Night Watchers, where me and my friends, including Niall from Oni Plays, chat about nonsense. It's good fun before you dive back into something terrifying. Till next time, everyone. It's time for me to clock out, but I'll be clocking back in real soon.
Year after year, our salary survey shows that certified medical billers and coders earn higher salaries than their uncertified peers. And the more the certifications, the higher the pay. So why not start with 2? That's right. In as little as 6 to 8 months, you can earn 2 in
This took place when I was about 8 years old. The house we lived in was built in 1944, and upstairs, there were 2 rooms joined together. My bedroom had a doorway, but it didn't have a door. To get to my brother's room, you had to walk through mine. Both rooms had walk-in closets, but my closet had a small crawl space that led straight to the attic. I remember that my closet was always freezing cold, and every time I went inside, I felt a creepy, uneasy feeling. Then one night I left some toys and Barbie dolls on the floor of that closet. I had a special Barbie from the movie Barbie as the princess and the pauper. This doll could sing several songs from the film when you pressed a button. Between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning, while my sister and I were asleep in our bunk beds, I heard a quiet singing sound. I woke up and realized I wasn't dreaming. The doll kept singing the same line over and over. I felt a strange, sick feeling in my stomach when I realized the songs weren't playing in the right order. It was just that one part, repeating again and again. I woke up my stepsister so she could hear it too. I remember her looking at me, and I could tell she was terrified. We were both only 8 years old and too scared to get out of bed. We stayed under the covers and called out to my brother in the next room. Finally, he woke up and came in to see what was wrong. When my brother heard the singing, he immediately thought we were playing a trick on him. But when he saw how scared we looked, he realized it wasn't a joke. Having him there gave us the courage to get out of bed and go look. We walked to the closet and turned on the light. I immediately noticed that familiar, freezing cold air. The first thing I saw made my heart sink. I was looking straight into the dark, scary attic. The small door to the crawl space was wide open. I always kept that door shut because it terrified me, but now it was open. Then I looked down at the Barbie on the floor. It was still singing that same song. There was nothing touching the doll, and the button wasn't stuck or broken. It was playing all by itself. My brother picked it up. The three of us just stared at each other, not knowing what to do. I still had that bad, sick feeling in my stomach, so I told him to throw it out the window. He did it. He tossed the doll outside just to get it away from us. We didn't want to wake up our parents, so we went back to bed. This time, my sister and I both slept on the floor in my brother's room. The next morning, we went downstairs. My stepdad had found the doll in the flower bed outside and brought it back into the house. It was sitting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't singing anymore, and my stepdad said it was silent when he found it too. We told our parents exactly what had happened the night before. For a second, I saw a flash of worry in my mother's eyes. But then she started giving us logical reasons for what might have happened. I believe my nightmares started after that night. In my dream, I am back in the Roscoe house. I open the closet door and hear someone crying. I look into the dark attic and see a girl sitting in the corner with her head down. That was the first clear memory I have of strange things happening in that house. After that, even more things happened that I still cannot explain. In my early 20s, I moved back into that house and rented it from my mother. At night, I would hear a muffled voice and the sound of feet shuffling above my bedroom. My room was downstairs, and directly above me was the closet of my old bedroom. Also, my son refused to sleep upstairs. He was about 4 years old at the time. I have always been very interested in ghosts and the supernatural, and I feel like I am sensitive to spirits.
It's a new year, so get your picks in 26 with Bob's Discount Furniture. From trendy new pieces to the latest tech, shopping at Bob's means more features, more styles, and more of what matters, and all at everyday low prices. Oh my Bob!
So while I'm a believer in the paranormal, I'd never had an experience of my own until a couple of months ago. So my friend Sam invited me to come to the lake house her family owns for New Year's Eve, and of course I went there. Now, I'd never been to the house before, but she'd previously told me about paranormal happenings there, most of which, at the time, were just stories to me. So, a little bit of background info first. My friend's lake house is fairly tiny, as it only has a couple of main rooms. As soon as you walk in the front door, you're in the main room, with a set of stairs directly in front of you. Up the stairs is an open kitchen that flows into a dining area, which then turns into this very small, narrow hallway to the left. To the right is her parents' room and the bathroom. The hallway leads to 2 small bedrooms, where Sam and I would be staying. The whole upstairs has this weird layout where you can kind of see into the kitchen from the hallway, and there's only one window at the far end, so it gets pretty dark once the sun goes down. Now the hallway contains 3 rooms, a small room with a closet and TV, our bedroom, which has a closet, bed, and dresser, and a tiny bathroom squeezed at the end. All 3 rooms are pretty close together, close enough where you can definitely hear things through the walls if someone's moving around or talking. The walls are thin, that old kind of construction. Now I drove to the house on a Sunday afternoon and got there later in the evening, maybe around 7 or so, when it was already pitch black outside. Sam had already been there a couple of days with her parents and had experienced some things already at this point. When I arrived, she pulled me aside almost immediately, looking kind of pale, and said we needed to talk about what had been happening. Once she told me the stories, we decided to get a ghost board, which, looking back, was a really bad idea. We drove to this little tourist shop in town that was somehow still open and grabbed one. At first, nothing much happened when we tried it. The planchette moved some, but it felt like one of us was probably pushing it. Past that, nothing eventful really happened, and we kind of laughed it off. The aftermath is what scared me, and makes me no longer a skeptic. We went to bed around 11 that night, as I was exhausted from the drive and being up since 7 that morning. Sam took her room, and I crashed in the small room with the TV. I remember texting my boyfriend goodnight and feeling relieved that nothing weird had actually happened. Now I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. Not much wakes me up, but I vividly remember waking up to a low, guttural growl. My friend has a small dog, so I brushed it off as that at first, patting my leg and whispering for him to come up on the bed. But when it happened again, deeper this time, I realized it was coming from the closet across the room. I shot up and stared, horrified and confused, watching the closet door in the darkness. Then I heard a soft scratching at the door, coming from inside, like nails dragging down the wood. At this point, I was absolutely terrified, frozen in place, unable to move, or even call out for Sam. But that slowly proved pointless. She sleeps like the dead. I got up and decided to go to the bathroom, hoping maybe I was just half asleep and imagining things. I opened the door carefully and stepped into the hallway. It was completely dark, and both her parents were asleep downstairs, meaning no one else was awake or moving around. The house was silent, except for the heater humming. Then I suddenly heard a soft whistle, low and melodic, like something calling me to come closer to it. It came from down the hallway, near her parents' room. I hurried back, practically ran into the bedroom, wrapped myself in the blanket and hid, pulling it over my head. I was close to crying at this point, shaking under the covers as nothing like this had ever happened to me before. Suddenly I felt a hand on my foot, an actual hand, cold and firm, grabbing the blanket and violently ripping it off the bed. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming, slightly gasping and trying to comprehend what the hell had just happened. My whole body went cold. I remember sitting up in the bed, back pressed against the headboard, staring into the darkness and waiting for something else to happen. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat there watching the closet and the door. But nothing else happened until morning. However, the next day was a completely different story, and honestly, even worse than the night before. The next day, me and my friend decided to watch movies all day, as we had no other plans, and honestly, I was too freaked out to want to go anywhere. Around noon, we decided to make some steaks for lunch, so we paused the movie, shut off the light in the hallway, and walked to the kitchen together. Now, as I said, the house is fairly small, with that open layout, so you can see just about everything from the kitchen, the stairs, the hallway entrance, all of it. Her parents were outside by the lake, and we could literally see them through the window. So when we came back maybe 10 minutes later with our plates and the light was turned on, we both just froze. We knew for a fact no one in the house had done it. We just stood there staring at each other. At least no one we could see. Fast forward an hour or two, and I started getting this overwhelming feeling I was being watched. Now this wasn't the normal, someone's in the room kind of watched. This was the something wants to hurt me kind of being watched. Hostile, intense like eyes, boring into the back of my head. I kept glancing over my shoulder, checking the hallway, but there was never anything there. The feeling remained for hours later, until more people arrived for the New Year's Eve get-together that night. Once the house filled up with Sam's family and friends, the oppressive feeling finally lifted. That night went by without incident, thank God. We stayed up till midnight, celebrated. It almost felt normal again. However, that still didn't change me being completely spooked and dreading going back to that bedroom. That's the first and last time I want to ever have something like that happen to me. My friend and I truly believe what terrorized me that night was a demon, and it seems like it has no intention of leaving that house. We did some research afterward, and apparently the land the house sits on has a pretty dark history that her parents never really talked about. To this day, she still has problems with it. She's even considered convincing her parents to sell the place. And here's the creepiest part. It seems to like me too. I've had weird things happen at my own apartment. Shadows in my peripheral vision. That same feeling of being watched. I'm genuinely afraid I brought something back with me. My uncle has this small farm that's been in the family for years, and since I was a little boy, we'd visit at least once a month. It's an okay farm, nothing fancy, and it sits right next to a small forest. One of our family traditions is going through the magic portal once you turn 10. It's really just this weird gap between two old oak trees, but my uncle always made it feel special. I remember being so excited when my turn finally came. Now my younger cousins are getting ready for theirs, and I can't wait to see their faces light up the same way mine did. The adults would grab some flashlights and shine them under these two trees that look like a big portal. It's actually a pretty good effect, especially at night. And since I'm the oldest in my generation, I was the first one to go through the portal back then. I'm 22 now, and my cousin just turned 10, so like always, we're heading to the farm this weekend. The thing is, my uncle recently hired a new farmhand to help take care of the place. The guy's only been working there for about a week, so he doesn't really know about our family traditions yet. I'm curious how he'll react when we all gather in the forest with flashlights. So we got to the farm 3 days before my cousin's birthday, because we wanted to enjoy the whole weekend. We'd camp one day, tell horror stories around a fire the next, and then the last night would be the night he leaves childhood behind. Everyone was pretty excited. These birthday weekends are always a blast. But the new farmhand was a bit weird. His name was Adam, this skinny, quiet guy who barely said 2 words to anyone. But being friendly and outgoing isn't really part of the job description, and he seemed good at what he did. My uncle said he was reliable, showed up on time, knew his way around the animals. Still, there was something a bit off about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. So the last night finally arrived. Around 6 p.m., we started organizing everything for the ceremony. While the kids were down at the river playing with some of the other adults, me, my uncle, and my other uncle took the horses and rode out with the lights to set everything up at the portal. But of course, one of the flashlights was broken. The batteries had leaked or something. So while one uncle stayed behind to position the other lights, me and my uncle headed over to Adam's cottage to grab a spare from the storage shed nearby. It was getting dark by then, and the place felt kind of isolated. We could hear the trees creaking in the wind as we approached his door. For some reason, the door was locked and Adam wasn't around. But my uncle owns the place, so he had a spare key with him. As he opened the door, the room was a complete mess. Clothes everywhere, papers scattered around. We also noticed some tools and equipment missing from the usual spot. While we were searching through the clutter, I found a camera sitting next to his laptop on the desk. It wasn't mine, but I figured maybe it was my uncle's old one. Call it curiosity or stupidity, but I picked it up and turned it on to check. I know, I probably shouldn't have gone through his stuff, but in the moment, it just seemed harmless. At first, there were just some photos of the forest, nothing unusual. But as I kept scrolling, things got creepier. Photos of the farm animals, the horses, some birds by the fence, then pictures of the house from different angles, shots through windows into rooms, and then photos of my family. A picture of my aunt and mom talking by the porch, photos of my sister hanging laundry, the kids playing in the pool, all taken without anyone knowing. My hands were shaking when I asked my uncle whose camera this was. He looked over my shoulder at the screen, and his face went pale. "That's Adam's," he said quietly, and headed back to where my other uncle was waiting. They both decided not to tell anyone else. Didn't want to ruin the night or scare the kids. They'd deal with Adam in the morning, maybe call the police then. So everything went ahead, as planned. My cousin walked through the portal, with all of us cheering him on. And it was actually pretty funny, because he got so scared by the lights and shadows that he stumbled backwards. Then, when we put him on the horse for his journey into adulthood, he had absolutely no idea how to ride properly. He was gripping the saddle for dear life while the horse just stood there. Everyone was laughing and celebrating, but I kept glancing toward Adam's cottage in the distance, wondering where he was. But then morning came, and Adam was nowhere to be found. His cottage was completely empty. All his stuff was gone, the camera, everything. It was like he'd packed up in the middle of the night and just vanished. My uncle was really worried because this guy had been taking photos of everyone. So my uncle contacted the police right away and filed a report. But nothing really happened after that. Adam never came back, and we never heard anything about him again. To this day, we have no idea who he really was or what he was planning. It still creeps me out thinking about those photos.
I don't find this to be scary, but after watching many videos, I realized what happened during all those years. In 2003, we moved into this house with my parents. A 30-year-old city house in front of a primary school. There was also the hospital at a 5-minute walk. Now, I never saw it as a home because I always felt watched. Sometimes I would be in my room and I would hear my mom ask for me. But when I'd go downstairs, she'd look confused and say she never called. The hallway always felt colder than the rest of the house. At night, I'd hear footsteps in the attic above my bedroom, even though nobody went up there. My dog refused to go past the second floor landing. She'd just sit there and whine, staring at something I couldn't see. I would answer before realizing that I was all alone. I remember way too well that one afternoon, I was all alone, just came back from school, and was having a snack. In the kitchen, there was a retaining wall. It was slim because one side of it was the passage to get to the dining table, and the other side was an open counter. So as I said, I was in the kitchen getting a snack. I had my back turned to the dining room, reaching into the cupboard for some cookies. That's when I heard it clearly. My mom's voice calling my name from upstairs. I froze mid-reach. The house was completely silent otherwise. I called back, asking what she needed. No response. My heart started racing as I remembered both my parents were still at work. I grabbed my snack and practically ran to my room, locking the door behind me. When I turned around, I saw my dad's smiling face, as if he was hiding his body behind the wall. Fun fact, its eyes were completely white. Anyway, I thought I hallucinated. Except the apparitions, the rest continued happening until I moved out. The cold spots, the voices, the feeling of being watched. I didn't forget anything, but I always blamed it on my creative mind, on being a lonely kid with too much imagination. Until last summer. I went back to visit my parents who still live there. Within an hour of being in that house, it all came flooding back. The heaviness in the air, that suffocating feeling of something watching from just out of sight. I was sitting with my sister, talking about stuff, including our parents' new home, and she asked me if I ever liked the old one. Turns out that she saw things when she was living there too. She also heard a couple of things, which is why she moved out of the house at 18. The house didn't feel safe. She told me about shadow figures in her bedroom doorway at night, always just standing there, watching her sleep. She'd pull the covers over her head until morning. Once, she woke up to all her furniture rearranged. Our parents thought she did it herself as some weird teenage thing, but she swore she didn't. We sat there in stunned silence, realizing we'd both been too scared to tell anyone for years. Neither of us had imagined it after all. Like, not our parents, not people visiting. The house itself. It had this presence, this weight that pressed down on you the moment you walked through the door. Well, my parents sold that house and have moved back to the countryside, in a house that feels like a cottage. When I visited them there for the first time, I actually cried. The air felt light, breathable. I could relax without constantly looking over my shoulder. My mom seems happier too, though she's never admitted anything was wrong with the old place. I guess this is why I love watching ghost videos so much now. It's like I'm searching for validation, proof that what we experienced was real. Every story I hear that mirrors our own makes me feel a little less crazy. Sometimes I wonder what the new owners are experiencing, if they feel it too.